The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. While people were listening to Jesus speak, he proceeded to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem, and they thought that the kingdom of God would appear there immediately. So he said, "The nobleman went off to a distant country to obtain the kingship for himself and then to return. He called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 gold coins and told them, 'Engage in trade with these until I return.' His fellow citizens, however, despised him and sent a delegation after him to announce, 'We do not want this man to be our king.' But when he returned after obtaining the kingship, he had the servants called, to whom he had given the money, to learn what they had gained for trading. The first came forward and said, 'Sir, your gold coin has earned 10 additional ones.' He replied, 'Well done, good servant. You have been faithful in this very small matter. Take charge of 10 cities.' Then the second one came and reported, 'Your gold coin, sir, has earned 5 more.' And to this servant too he said, 'You take charge of 5 cities.' Then the other servant came and said, 'Sir, here is your gold coin. I kept it stored away in a handkerchief, for I was afraid of you because you are a demanding man. You take up what you did not lay down, and you harvest what you did not plant.' He said to him, 'With your own words I shall condemn you, you wicked servant. You knew I was a demanding man, taking up what I did not lay down and harvesting what I did not plant. Why did you not put my money in a bank? Then on my return I would have collected it with interest.' And to those standing by he said, 'Take the gold coin from him and give it to the servant who has 10. But they said to him, 'Sir, he has 10 gold coins.' He replied, 'I tell you, to everyone who has, more will be given. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Now as for those enemies of mine who did not want me as their king, bring them here and slay them before me.' After he had said this, he proceeded on his journey up to Jerusalem." The Gospel of the Lord. So today and tomorrow we read from chapter 4 and chapter 5 of the book of Revelation. And I've been talking the last couple days about the historical context of 70 AD and the destruction of Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. It's primarily a prophecy about those events at the end of the first century. But now we also get into another large section of the book, which brings about another important theme in the book of Revelation. I would argue the most Catholic part of the book, maybe of the entire New Testament. These chapters are the most Catholic chapters of the Bible. And many of the things that are confusing to non-Catholics about what Catholics do can be explained in these chapters from the book of Revelation. Roughly chapters 4 through 11. They describe the heavenly liturgy that John himself is taken up into in heaven. And so I want to talk about this today and tomorrow. Today I want to talk about the fact that John is taken up and he sees what is resembling a heavenly temple. A heavenly temple. I think this is remarkable. When I was writing my paper on the book of Revelation, I was really struck by the temple imagery of the book of Revelation. The temple in Jerusalem is one of the most significant objects in the entire Bible. But because there is not a temple anymore, and because the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, there's kind of a lack of understanding of what the temple was all about. Oftentimes people can go to seminary for years and years, or even Jewish rabbis can become rabbis without knowing hardly anything about the temple because it's been gone for so long. But in Jesus' day, and in the days of the apostles, and in the day of this vision of Revelation, the temple still stood. And it was the heart and soul of everything God's people did. So it's important for us to understand what the temple was. And then it'll connect to this reading from chapter 4 today. So what exactly was the temple? First of all, when was the temple built? Who was the main head of the project? It was King Solomon. King Solomon in Jerusalem, right? Just after the days of King David. King David wanted to build a temple in Jerusalem, but because he had so much blood on his hands from all of his days fighting in wars, God did not permit it. And so rather his son Solomon, the son of peace, is the one who built the temple. And it was built in Jerusalem. And what was the significance of the temple? There were a couple of different aspects to it. First of all, the temple was split up into 3 parts. And those 3 parts represented 3 different aspects of the cosmos. Right? Remember in the book of Genesis, the world is basically created in 3 days. There are 3 different aspects to it that are created in those first 3 days. And then the second 3 days, all of the living creatures are created. So the temple likewise had 3 parts. There was the court of the Gentiles, which is where Gentiles could go and they could pray and they could worship God. But they weren't actually allowed to go inside the temple. You had to be Jewish in order to enter the temple. So that was the second part of the temple. And then finally in the temple, there was the sanctuary, and ultimately the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could enter once a year. So there was this 3-part structure in the temple. Now, does that remind you of Catholic churches at all? Catholic churches, likewise, are split up into 3 parts. Right? We have our gathering space, or the narthex, where anybody is welcome to come anytime they want. And then we have the main church building, where it's primarily Catholics who are attending. In the days before the Second Vatican Council, from what I understand, if you weren't Catholic, for example, during the Mass, you actually had to leave at a certain part of the Mass. And then ultimately we have the sanctuary, right? Just like in the Jewish temple, and ultimately the Holy of Holies, the tabernacle, which sometimes in churches you'll see the tabernacle with a veil across it, just like there was the veil of the Holy of Holies. So every Catholic church in some ways is supposed to be like an image of the temple. And it's sad that in some modern Catholic churches, this is just totally ignored. And sometimes you don't see that resemblance at all. Now the sanctuary in the temple was, these 3 parts represented 3 different aspects of the cosmos. The Jews believed that the temple was like a microcosm of the universe. And the universe was like a temple in the grand scale. It was a macro temple. And so the court of the Gentiles represented all the seas of the earth. And then the court of the Jews, where the Jews would come in and worship, it represented the land, like the Holy Land, those parts of the cosmos. And then ultimately the sanctuary represented God's dwelling place, the heavens. And the Holy of Holies itself was where God's presence literally dwelt. The heavens. Again, it's sad that in some Catholic churches we totally miss this, right? This is why, for example, in many Catholic churches, the sanctuary is elevated. It's supposed to signify that it's up, it's heaven. And in Catholic churches, there used to be things that would make a clear divide between the sanctuary and the rest of the church. You would have communion rails. Or in some churches, there was what's called an iconostasis, which there still are in Eastern churches. And it was it's this board that divides the sanctuary from the rest of the church. And on that board, you see images of saints or stars, images of the cosmos, representing that the sanctuary represents heaven, just like it did in the temple. In the Temple of Jerusalem, on the veil of the Holy of Holies, there was literally a panorama of the cosmos that was depicted. Signify it's the heavens, God's dwelling place. So that's what the temple signified, which means that when the people went into the temple to offer their sacrifices and their worship, they literally believed that it had cosmic consequences. We still believe that as Catholics today, that what we do at Mass has cosmic consequences. What we do at Mass, in a certain sense, preserves the world in order. It brings harmony and order in the midst of this world of chaos. Now, lastly, about the temple, how did Solomon know how to build the temple? He knew how to build it because God revealed the heavenly temple to him in a vision. That's what the Book of Wisdom says. So when Solomon sat down to draw up the drawings of the temple, he didn't just make it all up. He literally looked up into heaven, and God revealed to him what the heavenly temple looks like. And from that, Solomon designed his own temple. That's why it shouldn't be surprising when we read the book of Revelation, and John says that he is taken up into heaven. And lo and behold, what he sees is not just a bunch of angels on harps. It's not just a bunch of clouds. It's not people playing golf with Jesus, right? He literally sees a heavenly sanctuary, a heavenly temple. And in that temple, there is this immense liturgy taking place, the heavenly worship around God's throne all the time. And we're going to talk more about what that looks like tomorrow. Please remain seated as the altar is prepared.